Gather round the fire, where shadows dance and the night feels a little too quiet. Tonight, we're sharing ghost stories that will make you question every rustle in the woods and every whisper on the wind. From eerie encounters to tales of restless spirits, these stories are meant to chill you to the bone. So, grab a blanket, stay close to the fire, and get ready, because once the stories begin, there's no telling what else might be lurking in the darkness. The Hook Man. The Hook Man is one of the most well-known urban legends, often passed down through generations around campfires, and it starts with a seemingly innocent night out that turns into a terrifying ordeal. It was a dark and stormy night when a young couple decided to drive to a secluded lover's lane on the outskirts of town. They parked their car under the shadow of the trees, the branches swaying eerily in the wind. In the distance, thunder rumbled, but the couple wasn't concerned. They were young, in love, and eager to escape the rest of the world for a little while. As they sat there, enjoying the radio and the sound of rain tapping against the roof of the car, a news bulletin crackled over the airwaves. The announcer warned that a dangerous escaped criminal was on the loose, a man who had been recently seen in the area. He was described as deranged, armed, and particularly dangerous. The most striking detail, however, was that he had a hook for a hand, an eerie reminder of his violent past. The girl shifted uncomfortably in her seat and nervously glanced out of the foggy window. She couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that they shouldn't be out there, so far from town. "Let's go," she whispered to her boyfriend, her voice barely audible over the rain. He chuckled, brushing it off. "Don't worry, it's just a story to scare people. We're fine." But she couldn't shake the sense of dread settling over her. The storm, the darkness, the isolation, it all felt too much like the beginning of a horror movie. She insisted they leave, and after a few minutes of back and forth, he finally sighed and started the car. As the car pulled away, they heard a scraping sound coming from the passenger side. The girl froze, her eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know, maybe we scraped a branch or something," her boyfriend replied, though he sounded less certain now. They drove home in silence, the tension between them thick as the rain pounded harder against the windows. When they finally arrived at her house, she got out of the car and walked around to the passenger side. Her blood ran cold as she saw what was hanging from the door handle, a bloody hook, still dripping. The girl screamed, and her boyfriend ran around the car to see what had caused her terror. The sight of the hook sent a chill down his spine, but as they stared at it, they realized that if they had stayed just a few minutes longer in the dark, quiet lover's lane, the hook-wielding man might have done much worse than leave a calling card. To this day, the legend of the Hook Man continues to be told, a warning about the dangers that lurk in the shadows, and the thin line between safety and horror. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. The Vanishing Hitchhiker is a ghost story that has been told in various versions across the world, but its core remains the same, a mysterious encounter with a ghostly figure that disappears without a trace. It was a cold and rainy night, and a man named John was driving home along a lonely stretch of highway. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it hard to see the road ahead. He could barely make out the dim glow of his headlights reflected in the wet pavement. The trees on either side of the road loomed large and ominous, their branches swaying in the wind. As he drove through the storm, John saw something, or someone, on the side of the road. Squinting through the rain, he made out the figure of a young woman standing in the downpour, drenched and shivering. She looked to be in her early 20s, wearing a long white dress that clung to her body in the rain. Concerned for her safety, he pulled over and rolled down the window. "Do you need a ride?" he called out over the roar of the rain. The woman nodded silently, her face pale and her eyes wide. She climbed into the passenger seat without a word, and John noticed how cold she felt, as if she had been out in the rain for hours. Her dress was soaking wet, and her hair dripped water onto the car seat. Still, she remained eerily silent. John tried to make small talk as they drove, asking her where she was headed, but she only gave vague answers. She pointed to a distant house, and John agreed to drop her off. Something about the woman unnerved him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. They finally arrived at the house she had indicated, an old Victorian mansion that looked as though it had seen better days. As they pulled up to the driveway, John turned to the passenger seat to ask if she needed help getting to the door. But the seat was empty. The woman had vanished. John's heart raced as he looked around the car, but there was no sign of her. The passenger seat was wet, proof that she had been there, but where could she have gone? Shaken, John got out of the car and walked up to the house. He knocked on the door, and after a moment, an elderly woman answered. "I just dropped off a young woman. She said she lived here," John explained, his voice unsteady. The old woman looked at him sadly. "That must have been my daughter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She died in a car accident on this very road. 20 years ago." John felt a chill run down his spine as he stared at the old woman. He knew what he had seen. He had driven that girl to this house. But the realization hit him hard. The girl he had given a ride to was a ghost, still wandering the road on stormy nights, looking for a way home. To this day, travelers on that highway tell of a young woman in white who appears by the roadside, silently asking for a ride. And like John, they never forget the moment they realize she was never really there at all. The Ghost of Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary is a ghost story that's become famous in homes and around campfires. The tale centers on the legend of a vengeful spirit who can be summoned by chanting her name in front of a mirror. On a chilly autumn night, a group of friends gathered around a campfire, telling ghost stories to scare each other. After running out of stories to share, one of the boys brought up the legend of Bloody Mary. According to the story, Bloody Mary was the ghost of a woman who had died violently. Some said she was wrongfully accused of being a witch and executed, while others claimed she was a grieving mother who went mad after the loss of her children. Whatever the truth, the legend said that if you stood in front of a mirror at night and chanted her name 3 times, she would appear. "She'll scratch your eyes out if you look directly at her," the boy added with a grin, clearly enjoying the fright he was giving his friends. One of the girls, Sarah, scoffed at the idea. "It's just a stupid game," she said. "I'll prove it's not real." Her friends dared her to try, and after some teasing, Sarah agreed. Armed with a flashlight, she walked to the cabin's bathroom, closed the door, and stood in front of the mirror. Sarah's heart raced as she looked at her reflection, but she refused to admit she was scared. "Bloody Mary," she whispered, her voice shaky. She said it again, louder this time, "Bloody Mary." On the third and final time, her voice barely rose above a whisper, "Bloody Mary." For a moment, nothing happened. Sarah let out a nervous laugh, feeling foolish for having been so frightened. But just as she was about to turn away from the mirror, she saw it, a faint outline of a woman's face, slowly forming in the glass. The figure grew clearer, her eyes burning with rage, her face contorted in anger. Sarah screamed and stumbled backward, knocking over the flashlight as the room plunged into darkness. When Sarah's friends finally broke down the door, they found her lying unconscious on the bathroom floor. She was unharmed but in shock, muttering something about a woman in the mirror. Her friends tried to convince her it was all in her head, just a trick of the light and her imagination running wild. But Sarah knew what she had seen. She never spoke of that night again, but she was never the same. To this day, some believe that Bloody Mary still lurks in mirrors, waiting to be called. But those who dare to summon her may not like what they see staring back at them. These classic campfire ghost stories have been retold countless times, keeping the tradition of sharing scary tales alive. Each has its own unique way of tapping into our deepest fears, making them perfect for a night around the fire. If you're still sitting by the fire, consider yourself brave. Or maybe just lucky. The night may be quiet now, but don't be surprised if these stories follow you home. If you enjoyed these ghostly tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell before the fire burns out. Until next time, sleep tight, and remember, the real scares are just outside the circle of light.